as well. Okay. Well, hi, Pati Townsend. Thank you so much for joining me on the Week's Well.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's nice to make your connection. I've heard about you for years, of course, and our email exchange, like many that I've had when I extend an invitation to come on the show, went really deep, really quickly about the subject of lineage and what it is, why or whether it matters, and what specifically we might want to clarify about it, because there were a couple of things you said in our exchange, and let's just start there. What in your mind does need clarifying about yoga lineage in modernity?
Big overarching question.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with my own, what I can share best is my own process of inquiry over the years of being exposed to, the draw of so many lineages. Oh, you should do this, and oh, you should do this, and that kind of thing. So what I think needs clarifying at this point is whether or not in yoga we want to accept, there's the basic concept of Purusha and Prakriti, the purity and the nature, and generally the inclination that we want to get to the pure, and that the life experience is full of obstacles and problems and issues, and you get too caught in it, so you need to just get out of it, right? In order to basically rise up through the Sushumna channel, through the chakras, through whatever it is, via your own purification methods, right? That are, very carefully delineated, certainly in Hatha yoga. Hatha yoga is what most people are practicing, postures. And although I would question whether or not they're really practicing Hatha yoga even, but they're doing a lot of postures, right? So in that process, and then again, in most of the translations of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, most of them will continue to present the idea that one needs to purify. And I bought into that for many, many years. In fact, back in the day when I was practicing, lots and lots of advanced postures and all of that, in my mind, it was, now as I look at it, I was still very much under the sway of this hierarchical view of yoga, which is you're going to get better, you're going to get out of all the pain. Get out of all the pain. Well, getting out of pain sounds good, but is that really what's going on? So if we go back to Purusha and Prakriti as the two, we could say, just a very simplification, that they come together, that they combust, and all of manifestation is formed. Now, whether one wants to say that's a system of duality, there's Purusha, there's Prakriti, or one wants to say that by the time they get together, there's no point thinking about it as dual because you can't separate them. Not as long as you're in form. So where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves in form. And we also, I think, have found ourselves in the yogic tradition with a real aversion to form, a real aversion to nature. We want to clean it up, right? We want to clean it up inside ourselves so that we can notice the truth. Question is, which is the truth? The empty radiance, or is the truth the radiance manifesting through nature, who has been so maligned, yogically, so maligned to be less than hierarchy? Above is Purusha, below is Prakriti, making all kinds of trouble, right? So in terms of the view, what I began to realize And not really fully until I met my teacher that I started working with 20 years ago now, Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen. It wasn't really until I met her and saw the embodiment of something I had never seen before that I began to put all of this into the umbrella of what I had studied over so many years in yoga, specifically in philosophy, to realize that, wow, it's very possible that I, along with many others, have been sold a bill of goods on this. You know, the idea that something, i.e., if we're talking lineage, some person is better in some way, is antithetical to the idea that nature and pure awareness, Purusha and Prakriti, have come together equally, and there's this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is messy. It's messy. So yes, it's messy, and yes, we still want to see life as it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So what I began to think about, and then to find reflected in more tantric style philosophies. I'm not a scholar of anything. I'm an inner inquirer, right? But in the systems that I was looking at, the tantric picture seemed to be much more acceptant of the field of nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that the Shakti, right, wasn't less than the Shiva. There was no one without the other. And finally realized, and this was Bonnie, that when I say realize, I mean for myself, right? This is my experience. I'm not saying this is the way anything is. What I realized was that this messiness that I had such an aversion to and was practicing so hard and diligently to get over. And when I talk about practice, I'm not talking about this thing everybody talks about, you know, when I get on my mat. It's like, what are you doing the rest of the time, for God's sakes?
Totally.
You know, the mat? It's the dishes. It's the 4 children I had. It's not the mat, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
getting back, Bonnie pointed out in a very, very clear and beautiful manner how if she was very sick, she was just coming out of being very, very sick. She'd been housebound for years when I first met her. She taught a yoga workshop at Kripalu. I lived near Kripalu, so I went to it. And here was this woman, as far as I was concerned, as fully realized as anyone I had ever seen, talking about how she embraces the pain and she embraces the complexity and the difficulty. And I saw a woman with less aversion to anything in life than I had ever seen. And I thought, this is very, very fascinating. She didn't call what she was doing yoga, but she was a great yogi, is a great yogi.
Mm-hmm. Developer of body mind centering, yeah.
The developer of body mind centering, yes. And a good friend and a mentor for me over the last 20 years. And the friend part is critical because there's no hierarchical thinking in it. And in the early days, I was just like, oh my God, Bonnie, you know, this is the first devotional thing I had ever felt. And I, you know, and she took my head in her hands and she said, Pati, no, it's not like that. It's you. And that wasn't me personally. It was anybody whose head she took in their hands. Is it okay if I keep going on about Bonnie here for a little bit?
Yes, I have a couple
Right, 'cause
questions, but I want to know. Yeah,
she
please.
becomes the heart of kind of this culminating practice. I'm an elder now in the yoga community, so there is a sense of culmination going on, and she has been so very, very critical in forming that, and has never, in my mind, really contradicted any of the philosophical underpinnings of yoga that I had embraced over my life. It was just a different slant at the same thing. For example, she wanted to know more about yoga so she could go out in the world and teach how yoga teachers and so forth, body mind centering in that form. So she took my 200-hour yoga teacher training, which was pretty funny. Bonnie sitting there with her notes and her lunchbox, listening. And at one point, when I was teaching philosophy and I came to the subject of samskara, and I was talking about how these are the habitual patterns and that they keep us from seeing life as it is, and that they block our growth, which I was still, feeling was a linear kind of up and out situation. And she came up to me. So samskaras are the patterns of thinking and acting of which we are unaware, but we continue to do, and said to block our experience of deepening, right? What did she say? She said, "Pati, I just don't understand this concept." And I'm just like, "Oh, well, let me tell you, and I'm explaining it in the relationship to the koshas and the layers of consciousness and all this." She says, "Pati, I just, I disagree." And we left it at that. And I thought about it for about 2 years before I started to get what it was. It's the acceptance of that frees you. It's the acceptance that it's a mess. It's hard. In the acceptance, we're not caught by it anymore. I find this to be yoga. If we're not caught by it, we can also see the rest of it, including the vastness. It's like the ocean. The ocean is vast and open and wide. And what are we going to do? Try to get all of the seaweed out of the ocean for the ocean to enjoy being itself? It makes no sense. Seaweed is part of it. The fact that you and I, that we all have these personal lives, sometimes joyful, sometimes very sorrowful. To me, this became a huge breakthrough in what is yoga practice.
Did you feel that in your body? Were you able to map that into your body immediately?
The body. She is a master of the body. So, in a certain way, because I had done, everything I thought I ever needed to do in asana, that was done. So part of me from that older school thought, well, that's fine. I'm done with asana. Not only was I done with it, I was bored with it. I didn't want to do it anymore, but I wanted a deeper practice. This is, again, Bonnie. So I thought that for a long time, I thought, well, I got all these tensions out of my body, and those are reflected in my mind. So my mind is now supposed to be clearer. And yet, not so much. Somewhat. There's a difference, but not so much. So in meeting Bonnie, what I'll just say very, very generally that her inquiry is directly into structure, every layer, body embodiment, every layer from the most dense to the most subtle, all the way into the energetic level, through, cellular consciousness and understanding what's going on there in the movement of information from the inner wrapping of the cell and the outer wrapping of the cell.
Mhm.
And it's floating in its fluid environment and all of that. So I'll just stay with that because that is where we went. That's where she had been going, where she has been going now for 60 years.
Wow.
So if you think of when she started this, what is now so popular embodiment inquiry, if you try, you can't think 60 years back, but I can, and almost.
I can almost.
Right. To think that she was doing that was insane. And now, of course,
Yeah.
20 years ago, she started working on embryology. Now suddenly embryology is a big deal, right? Because of, how we formed. Well, guess what? That's when the first prana flows come in. That's when, if you want to have healthy movement, follow the prana.
Yeah.
Because doing this and this and this and this and this is fun, but it can override the natural flow of prana. I was watching Angela on your thing, and
Yes.
Angela.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Mm.
at some point here, I can give a thumbnail sketch of my own journey in terms of teachers.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. And I wonder, I want to stick with the prana thing for a moment, because one of the things I met with somebody yesterday, sort of a new client person who wanted to know about some aha moments that I have had in my yoga practice, which is a huge question. And there's too many for me to count. And I kind of trusted going into the conversation that the ones that were right for me to share were good for her to hear, good for me to say in that moment, would come. I mean, I had a couple of ideas, but it's such a big question. And so continuing on as these things occur, I'm thinking about the aha moment when I realized that prana has no English counterpart as a word. I mean, we don't have one. It's oxygen's the closest, maybe breathing in, like the whole cycle of breath. I don't know. Like, I don't even think so, because it's not oxygen. It's something so much more than that. So when I started thinking like, whoa, this one of these words that this practice I'm engaging in really anchors what I'm doing, then how do I figure that out? Well, I guess the only way I figure that out is by just interiorly, like looking for it, just sort of practicing and feeling it. So I just want to put that out there and float the idea of also the ocean analogy you were giving. I love the seaweed idea, but I was also wondering if samskaras are not as well. Like, to say you're looking at the ocean, you're standing at the, on the sand somewhere on the beach, and your mind is looking at the rhythm of the waves, and you start to think, right, it's high tide or it's low tide, or you're thinking rhythm. So your mind starts to just continuously like project these ideas that you have about rhythm, these ideas that you have about waves, about tides, about whatever, instead of observing one wave after another, because every single wave is different. Every single one of them breaks at a different place in a different way. It curls, it foams, it whatever. Do you think that that's the right comparison between like samskaras looking at the field of reality and just being immersed in the actual reality in front of you, that you can't really predict. You don't really know what it is. And so do you think that's a good way of describing?
I like that description very much.
Okay.
Very
So
much. And, I would add to it because it got me thinking about the ocean, the currents. That's the prana, the current that brings it along and is
I love that.
sometimes so gentle and other times, right?
That's a
So,
great analogy. Yeah.
yeah, the waves become the expression of the underlying. And then also in relationship, because that's the other thing. It's a relational planet.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's so great. And so, okay. So that's where Bonnie took you. And, it's interesting. I didn't exactly expect that we would be kind of centering her as much. So I'm glad that we have. And I do want to go back to her because I also am thinking about you saying I'd never, I had it for a minute, but you'd never seen embodiment like that before. Is that the word you, yes. Yeah. So you've never seen that before. So let's say that was 20 years ago. You were based on your bio at that point, you were 20 years into your practice, right? This is sort of, right? So maybe let's talk about that 20 years leading up to it, because the audience that we have on Weekswell is so interesting because nearly I don't know for sure, but because I don't hear from everybody, but the people that I do hear from, and I know where a lot have come from, are pretty lineage embracing. Whatever lineage there is, they're kind of in it. They're very interested in learning about this interdisciplinary conversation, which is what, as I emailed you about, is most interesting to me. And especially now that I'm talking to you, I don't know, a couple years into this conversation, but a full year kind of into the podcast and the webinars that I did on this platform, it occurs to me that intersectional moment that you had, that 20 years into your practice, whatever you'd been doing prior to that, and that Bonnie kind of, blew out of the water or changed utterly, or, whatever, maybe overnight flipped a switch. I have no idea. I'd love to know more, is what a lot of people might be faced with more regularly now because of the way that media delivers these intersectional moments. Like you were sort of analog in front of Bonnie, and you had that experience, and it was a more analog time, really. Nobody was scroll stopping at that time. Now they are. So I guess I'm asking a lot at once, but just 20 years in, what happened? And let's get to there. And then what advice could you give to people now who, on a potentially much more regular basis, are having these possible sort of pranic mind blows like you did with Bonnie?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I think lineage is important. And I do consider myself to have a very strong lineage, but it's not a lineage of Iyengar or Patabi or my earliest teacher, Maharishi, or any of the other people that I explored. It is not at all linearly from them. And when I said that I think lineage needs a kind of a re-examination, what I mean is that this Purusha Prakriti dichotomy, where nature is less than, has been guiding our lineage conversation too. The lineage is Iyengar's. When Angela said, wait, I'm going to do this, Iyengar said, fine, you're out. When I say to Bonnie, I'm doing this and this, she's like, oh, that's so interesting, right? There's very different. So what I'm looking at in terms of a reorganization of lineage, at least in what it means to me, I don't care what anyone else does. What it means to me is that it's coming from the field of nature and from the teachings. So my lineage comes through first of all, this Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, because he, he's considered to be just a wah guy. He was one of the most powerful teachers I ever had. And his was, it turns out, a very tantric position on life. So that was the first thing. And when I would come into these other systems and look at them, I thought it was a fault, but I couldn't make a choice. Because every single time I'd say, yeah, that's really interesting. That's really great. But, I can't agree, like with Iyengar, I can't agree that I'm not going to teach alternate nostril breathing to beginners.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
It can help them so very much. And that was a deal breaker for me with Iyengar. It's like, I can't do that. Okay.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Patabi was, I was not attracted to Patabi.
Yeah.
But luckily, I had learned the practice earlier with some of his wonderful renegade kind of exciting teachers. And okay, so I guess I'm going into the timeline now, right?
Yeah.
So let me just back up a little bit, because the timeline really does begin with Maharishi, and then it's it's a very long time, 15 years before I ever started a really serious asana practice. And I started my serious asana practice in the late 70s at a place called the Center for Yoga in Larchmont District of Los Angeles. And it was run by Ganga White.
Oh.
All right. And Anna Forrest. Whoa. I walked in there feeling crummy, one of those aha moments, I suppose. Took a class and went out a dedicated practitioner, now of asana as well as my meditation, which was ongoing. They were very, very powerful teachers. Anna was the most nurturant of, I don't know what people think of Anna at this point, but she was just the most nurturant and loving, safety place. And Ganga was teaching that, well, this is kind of good. This is got philosophically, they'd both been to India. Yeah, this is good. This guy was crazy. You got to hear the story about this guy. And Patabi heard him twice, and that was enough. And Iyengar called Anna Ganga's girl. Anna had gone into an Iyengar class with a patch on her shorts that said "question authority." So these were the people that, that I was initially learning from, and it was great. Then came all of the Iyengar schools starting to, creep in, and the Iyengar convention was Angela spoke about, was in 1984 in San Francisco, and Angela was there. Victor was there. I had never met Victor before. He was new to the whole thing, but Angela was there teaching all of her beautiful wildness. And Donna Holloman, another spectacular teachers still today, both of them still today, both very powerful influences on me, were brought up to the stage, and Iyengar was there, and they were asked to show something of these new things they were doing, right? I don't remember, maybe it was Victor who showed something, I don't know, but I do remember Donna, because Donna came into headstand. And at that point, it had become popular with both Donna and Angela to do headstand with the legs slightly apart. This was crazy. This was crazy to the Iyengar people. They were just like, and Iyengar was up there, and he was asked by, I don't know, the moderator, so what would you say to Donna? And I can't vilify Iyengar. I see him as a very, very talented sweetheart. And when he spoke about Donna, he said, oh, she will learn. And it was so sweet.
Mm.
And I never forgot that.
Mm.
Right? So there was so much to learn from that lineage, although, and I did practice it, continue practicing it, with some of the primary teachers of that time. Kofi, Lucia, right?
Mm-hmm.
One more short story about the convention with Kofi. So the same convention, the different teachers were giving different classes, and Kofi was teaching class and I was there. And we were all in Sarvangasana. And we had been for a very long time,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
those were the days.
Yeah. Mm.
And Iyengar came in with his retinue of people, and all of his robes. And he came in and Kofi stopped, right? And Iyengar proceeded to literally rip Kofi apart. And I was devastated because that was one of the most beautiful classes I had ever attended until that point. That's how good it was. It was one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And Iyengar came in and said, first comment was, you call that Trikonasana? You call that Sarvangasana? Everyone was just, oh, right? And in the same time, in terms of this not making decisions, which I think was very useful because I was studying seriously, I saw his feet because he was standing right next to me. And I have never, and still have never, seen such gloriously beautiful feet. And that meant something to me.
I have to tell you, when I was in my early training days, I took classes from people based on their feet. I'm serious. If I really was so engrossed in their feet, and I felt like looking at them taught me things that I couldn't quite put into words, but of course would be listening to their instructions and looking at their feet. I mean, I probably studied for, I don't know how many years, 5 or 10 years that way. I swear
That's
to you. So I
very,
totally understand what you're saying,
yeah,
100%. And I
yeah.
would love to have been able to take in BKS Iyengar's feet
Oh,
like that. I understand totally what you're saying.
yeah.
Anyway.
So, and you understand obviously what an impression that made. And I never took a class personally from Iyengar. I actually had no interest in doing so, but I loved him.
Yeah, well, not
From
after
that
that
moment.
dress down. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about the embodied experience of being so deeply, to use the word again, engrossed in an experience of Sarvangasana. Again, I may be projecting, but in fact, I'm just thinking about this conversation I had yesterday. This is probably heretical to say, but I go into Shirshasana and Sarvangasana to think. I know that my mind, my brain is very soothed, in Shirshasana. And so the longer I stay, the better it is for me, because of course you can't, it's not like I'm doing a checklist. I'm just observing my mind. It's just a different way. And Sarvangasana, I feel like I observe my heart. I mean, I just think to me, that's the essence of the two poses, in a trite kind of nutshell. But if you all were in Sarvangasana over a 10, 15, whatever minute period, and Mr. Iyengar comes in and starts yelling at the teacher, that must have been traumatizing for you, no?
Oh, no, I wasn't traumatized.
Oh, good. Okay. I don't know.
I was concerned for Kofi.
Yeah. So that's what you're
And
thinking.
I was a little sorry that the class got interrupted, but I was shocked at the,
but it didn't take away
I
from
was
your
shocked.
pose. You weren't having this, I don't know, maybe my mind is going to codependence, where I would want to take care of the teacher or help like the teacher not feel so bad. But I can't imagine it didn't really change your pose, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm sure it changed my pose, but that didn't really matter. I was much more interested in the dynamic of what was actually going on.
Yeah, I can understand
I
that.
disagreed with Iyengar inside myself. I said, no, Trikonasa, I keep saying it. Sarvangasana is pretty good. Pretty good right now. Okay. So anyway,
cool. Okay.
so that was that about the other thing at the convention that I found so interesting and was really helpful for me. But every step of the way, I never got information about these people who were helpful for my path. I didn't get information about them that made me throw them out with the bathwater, or their teachings out with the bathwater.
So that's a question. So as we keep going, because maybe this will help kind of get us to the interaction with Bonnie and your eventual decision, I don't know when, to do embody yoga. Can you tell me when did you start embody? Is that how you say it? Embody? I was like, is it embody yoga? Embody yoga? It's such a
embody
great
yoga.
Embody yoga. Such a nice name. Yeah. When did you start that?
I started that right after I started training with Bonnie.
Okay, so 20 years ago.
It was one of those things where I was throwing everything out I had ever learned, and I lost so many students, which was fine with me. I really didn't care that it was so clear to me that this was my dharmic path.
That's so cool.
Right? I lost so many students, and but I was having so much fun with the depth of the inquiry, and anyway, I was having so much fun.
Okay.
But before Bonnie, I just want to fill in the little bit of a blank in there.
Yeah, I meant to do that. I just wanted to, I was thinking embody yoga. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yes.
No, we can get to that. But I just want to, in terms of timeline, the next thing was Patabi. And Patabi came. So this is the way again of yes, this, but not really that, So Patabi came to the yoga center in Los Angeles, invited by Ganga, and he taught a class. We were very, very strong practitioners already. So this was 1985. We were very strong practitioners. He was going to do a little bit, some suryas, et cetera. He ended up doing the full primary series with us. So it was, of course, very long, because when Patabi was first teaching, it was inhale, or one, whatever he said. He didn't want you to breathe yet. And
wow.
Right. So that, and I'm not overdoing it. That was what was going on. And it was very powerful. But I was 5.5 months pregnant. And one of those things where you say, oh, this can't be right. This cannot be right. Patavi came around. I was in Marichiyasana 4. So that's the one where you're Padmasana here, you're here, and then you go around here, reach all the way around and hold. You can look it up if you're not sure which one. No,
we can put it in the show notes. It's no joke of a pose.
It's insane for a pregnant woman. Insane. So my teacher, Ganga, he's in the line on the other side. So Patabi gets me all the way turned around, and I'm holding, and now he's trying to, do whatever. I look over my shoulder and I see Ganga, and Ganga is mouthing to me. So I thought it was too late. No, not too late. Everything was fine. Yeah. And I came around, I was just like, oh, okay, it all feels okay. But yeah, he must be crazy. So I asked him the next day, I asked him a specific question about pregnancy, because I was practicing. I was a fairly new practitioner. I've been practicing just a few months. And I asked him, so, I'm very tired in my pregnancy. I'm very fatigued. And Patabi said, just keep practicing. I said, well, it feels like maybe I want to rest. No. We pushed through, and, part of me wanted to say, yeah, okay, I can do that. But the other part of me said, he doesn't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can't know. Why is he saying? Right.
Right.
So there's that. And then comes Yoga Works, which was Yoga Works.
Yeah.
And at
Which was
Yoga
a great
Works,
innovation. I mean, it was a
it was
great
so good.
idea.
It was
Yeah.
so good. And it was so good for a short time.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
But then there it was, and we were like this, hovel of a group, like, what can we do? And Chuck brought Richard to Yoga Works. Patabi had been there a couple times. I didn't even take the class.
Freeman, right? Richard Freeman.
Richard Freeman.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Richard becomes one of the, I would say if I had 3 teachers of asana, if I had only 3, it would be Anna, Richard, and Bonnie.
Mm.
Richard came in that room and, Richard, he's like,
Amazing.
he's all space is the way I look at him.
It's so true.
And yeah, and he came in, and instead of just the numbers and the practice, he was teaching us primary series the first time. He began in Tadasana with such poetry that he was speaking. He wasn't reciting a poem. He was bringing us into a practice that I had been so hungry for, a practice that had the richness of yoga, not just the movement or the alignment or something like that. And I went up to Richard after that class and I said, and this was in probably, it had to be 87 or 88. And I said, this is it. This is the new yoga. This is what is going to happen. And, he just kind of laughed. And I felt that I knew that was true. I knew it was coming. Of course, it took another 20 years to really, get out there in the world. And by the time yoga did get so far out there in the world, we got to scroll and stop. Is that what you call it?
I call it scroll stop, but I make stuff up every day,
I like it. I like scroll stop.
Because it is. You're just like thumb, stop. Thumb, stop, thumb. I feel bad. I'm going to feel worse. I feel, I feel, and then you have these guttural responses through this thing that has evolved us so far on the planet. And yet we use it and our front brain and our rhomboids to slouch over like the animals we've emerged from. It blows my mind, actually, that it's like, it's so stressful to be alive and so stressful to evolve. I feel like subconsciously we consent. I'm a big into this consent thing. Like there's a writer, oh gosh, I'll put it in the show notes, but she's been on Ezra Klein a bunch. And I've just read her recently quoted in another kind of a millennial, kind of a woman at the New Yorker named Gia Tolentino. I've mentioned her twice now in some recent podcasts. And she mentions this woman, I can't remember what, but this woman, both of them have kind of quoted her, brought her on to talk to them, talks about how we are at the precipice of not understanding what we are allowing to happen to us. So I guess I'm trying to say we're like consenting to these innovations, consenting to these circumstances, but part of me feels like we're just being like drugged or lulled into this slump, which necessarily means that we're so much less present, but I digress. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's very interesting. And it, before the scrolling culture, before the scrolling culture, we were already culturally addicted to self-fragmentation. We were already, it's like this and this, I'm thinking, billboards, I'm thinking television, commercials. I'm thinking this aspect of me. I'm a blah, 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 and I'm a da, 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 and a da, 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 and a da, da, da. But this identification with the fragments, right? So this, to me, this whole thing is just an increase of that same. It began earlier. This is not a brand new phenomenon. It's a trap that is even more so now. And what's interesting is that the trap of that is happening through a field, a unified field. Right. So that's such a dichotomy to me, because there is this unified field. You know, I'm talking to you, you're in Denver. Right. And yet we are very, very seriously fragmented. And then that takes me into how we embody ourselves as fragments. And how addicted we are to thinking of ourselves as fragments, and how even the processes of yoga where they fragmented us more, was my experience. Although it's wonderful to know and to learn all these different alignment principles that were and are taught, right? Without, and maybe that's the way we get in. Maybe we do go through the external, and if we are continuing to inquire deeply, we will get to a more unified place. But thinking of this and this is not the same thing as a movement of prana that is coming from my core, which has a directional flow to the rotation.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Instead of, I'm going to do Pinchamayurasana, I'm coming out, and I'm going to roll, and I'm going to walk in, I'm going to lift my tail, I'm going to, you know.
Can I ask a question about that? Or do you want to keep going?
No, I'm good.
Okay, it's like a student question, really. Like, so directional flow. So what's the point? I think about this all the time. What's the point of the shapes? Is it to, what's the point of the shapes in the context of prana?
You know, I ask myself that all the time too. And I explore now from the inside to find where's the arm's going to go out, it's going to be Trikonasana, it's going to get out there. But if it goes out like this, well, I'm still fragmented. I'm not actually unified with anything. But if I can get in with the prana flow and find the way that, in this case, I'm not doing something I know how to do, I'm just doing what is showing up right now. If I go, so Trikonasana, I still can't figure out how to do a posture and keep the prana flow if I don't at least have micro movement inside.
Totally.
Right?
I call it micro flow. I think like the flow yoga thing, micro flow, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So there, I want to pin something really quick and then ask you about these 3 pillars of embody yoga. And so Abhijata Iyengar just came to the States to do for a convention. So she led a convention out in San Diego, and 5 days or whatever it is. And working parent that I am, I logged in and tried to take a couple of sessions live, but it's such a huge commitment. It was the last week of school. I was like, so I'm like just crawling my way through the recordings. I mean, I'm like, well, I've got 30 minutes. I'll just rewind, what she said, the last good thing. And so I'm taking these sessions in these weird concentric kind of overlapping events in my own mind. And I'm like, in my own lived experience, really. So part of me thinks I should write about that. And just like this live thing that occurred that everybody kind of just gobbled down, because she's an excellent teacher, 20 years. She studied under her grandfather for 15 years before he then died, and devoted her academic studies to kinesiology and biomechanics and stuff. So she's packed in there, and she's a millennial. She's late 30s. And I think has a lot of ideas about the way she'd like to see the Iyengar method evolve. So anyway, that's just but one of her main concepts in the very beginning was, you think about moving to something, you're moving, but what about moving from? Go to from, movement. So it just makes me think of what you were just describing, that I do think the Iyengar method has become very rigid in the wake of Mr. Iyengar's passing. I think that the way certification occurs and training occurs, I was belatedly an Iyengar yoga teacher. I was 16 years of teaching and then decided to get certified. And I'm so glad I am one. I'm eternally grateful for my apprenticeship experience with John Schumacher. I mean, I feel nothing but gratitude for all that I've learned, but the rigidity inside of the system as the deputies keep trying to execute sort of the method is interesting to me, because I feel like the chi, if I may cross, borders here, I just feel like the energy is, it's locked, it's stuck. Anyway, I'm sorry to go on, but her whole teaching was source where are you moving from? What about moving from to a thing instead of to a thing, instead of the goal, instead of get to the shape,
Right. So. And then, just to add to that, because nothing actually goes in one direction. So where are you moving from? And then what is coming back? It doesn't mean you come back all the way back, but it's that. And you can see it can become still. And when we practice that way, and then we become still from there, it's very interestingly different from finding a position and stay still, don't move,
Right. Like hold it against all odds, or just hold it until you're fatigued, or hold it until the mind tells you to leave it, kind of a thing, which is
right.
common in
the mind tells you to leave it. Well,
I know. And I don't, and
that doesn't have a good rap.
I know. And I don't mean to get too far down the Iyengar rabbit hole, because I do want to pull into, how you founded Embody Yoga and what it is and what you're doing now, in the context of how you were saying that the lineages, the concepts have been more or less the same. Did I understand that correctly? And from the email or email exchange, and is that what you mean when you talk about how you were able to take this wisdom from Pati Joyce, but also recognize that as a whatever he was man, he wasn't going to be able
well, I want to just say that I probably wouldn't have taken wisdom directly from Pati, but I was willing to take it from Richard.
I got it. I understand. I see. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. And Richard, I mean, there's so much wisdom to take from him, seems to me. Yeah. So you have these three teachers. You have Anna, you said, right?
Yeah.
And Bonnie and Richard.
Yes. And then there's also Angela, who was early, very early in the feminization of yoga.
Right.
Bonnie, of course, was somewhere else doing her work at the same time, but I was with Angela. That was very, very powerful for me. And I will say that Donna Holloman was also powerful for me during that time. Two real keepers of the feminine aspect. And then my primary teacher for 10 years was Anna Forrest.
I did not know that. That is so cool.
Yeah.
That's
great.
I was pregnant 5.5 months, by the way, and forced my husband to travel through the back roads of Italy to go meet Donna and take a class with her.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I know.
Wonderful.
It was amazing. It was amazing to be in her presence. Yeah. So Anna Forrest for 10 years. So that must have informed, I don't know if you had started Embody Yoga at that time, but I love these three pillars, the embodied.
I didn't start Embody Yoga until, 2000. Anna was like 78 to 88.
Early Anna Forrest. Oh,
very early Anna. Yeah. Very
That's
early.
So cool.
So anyway, but Embody Yoga became Oh, there was a very clear reason that I started Embody Yoga. Not at all, genuinely not at all for myself, but because I adored Bonnie, and because I continue to think that this is advanced yoga. This is the underpinning of, this is the nature meditating on itself, right? Rather than trying to get out. Because I felt the power of it to be so intense, I decided that I would do everything I could to make her work more available. And because I'm a yoga teacher, and I also thought that her work needed a form, it was just too formless for most people. It's like, what? How do you practice this? And I realized people like yoga. I like yoga. We can do this in yoga, and I'm going to do it. And I was hoping to be able to help Bonnie's work be spread more through yoga. So that's why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a wonderful, wonderful process. I love it.
It's and the Embody Yoga, based on what you are describing, is the perfect name. It's perfect.
I think so. Yeah, it really is. It's unfortunate that everybody uses embody and somatics and all of that stuff now. I do think that, somatics is about the body. I get that. But somatic yoga is not just about being in yoga postures. It's got to be about the whole thing. It's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It's the inquiry into consciousness, and form. So that's why it's embody yoga in this case, instead of just embody something.
Yeah, I want to actually, there's two lingering questions, and I want to be respectful of your time. And I also, these last conversations I've had have gotten they're so great, and they wind up going long. And I hope the audience doesn't mind that they're over an hour. I hope you don't.
No,
we're
I'm
almost
fine.
there. Okay. Because there are two questions. One is really specific about that exchange or that understanding you had with Richard, which is, this is where it's going. Was it the flow? Is that what you meant? The movement, the sort of, what was it specifically that you saw we were headed toward?
It was the blending of the clarity of kind of a sweet alignment that wasn't overdone, but was just so right. And the poetry and the philosophical knowledge that was really lacking everywhere at that point.
In the 70s.
In the
80s.
This was in the 80s.
In the 80s. What do you mean by that? Philosophical, lacking? Is this the decade you're addressing?
Everybody was into the physical. It was all physical. Mm-hmm. All physical. Richard was clearly not all physical. He clearly was using the practice as part of the weave of his powerful inquiry and dedication. And I did see the same thing in Bonnie, in just a different form.
And so you've been this body holder, this I was going to say space holder, but they're kind of space holders for your body exploration. It seems to me body consciousness, pranic exploration, back to the name of your school, basically. And that, I guess, is my kind of last question, I guess, which is your embody yoga and what you're doing. For me, anyway, you've described so well. I really have a good picture of what I think you're after in your classes. And of course, I've spent time on your site and read there. So taking a little, maybe more time than the average, sort of Jane or something. But is it these threads of learning that you filtered through your own consciousness and body that have emerged into these three pillars, the embodied inquiry, the santosha, and the viveka? Is that an
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah. You know, when you're presenting things, you want to give a few simple ways to enter the work.
Right.
So I wanted to hone it down for myself into these three tools that one pretty much needs in my mind to really seriously inquire. So because of the nature of what I'm doing, it's an embodied inquiry. I mean, everybody inquires, you meditate, whatever you I hope you meditate.
Right.
You
Totally.
meditate, and you meditate in action, in what is this? That's embodied inquiry. What does this feel like? Do I actually have a hand? What?
Right.
Does it have its own consciousness? So that's the embodied inquiry, right? And then the next one, santosha, is, well, it's most commonly translated as contentment, of course.
Yeah.
And to me, in practicality, santosha becomes self-acceptance, radical, total self-acceptance, without judgment about it, and without inferring non-action. You can do something about it. Doesn't mean that you have to stay a jerk. You know, if that's what you find, you say, oh my God, I can't believe I did this and this and this. And, you know, and then you get caught in the aversion to, oh God, I've got to stop thinking about that because that's ruining my life and my meditation. And, you know, aversion, that's when you're really locked. So the santosha is the process of opening the doors, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Right? They open the doors because you're not so involved in the aversion to yourself. Right?
Which takes so much
And
effort. Yeah. It takes so much effort.
it takes practice.
Yeah.
And that's where lineage is important, because if you're not practicing, you can forget about saying, oh yeah, I practice in the I was just going to say something nasty. I won't. I practice in thus and thus lineage.
Yeah.
It's like, seriously? How much time have you spent thinking about that?
Right.
Before you decide that you practice in that lineage? Do you know anything about that lineage?
Right.
Right? Is it, what makes it a lineage to you? You should be able to answer these questions. I think, in my humble opinion, not so humble all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the last one? Oh, viveka. Viveka, the discerning, the sword of discrimination. Why? Because you are bound to try to fool yourself. Bound. You'll get in there and you'll think something. And you'll come out and you say, well, it's because I this and this. It's like, no, you need to inquire more deeply. What is it? And rather than coming out saying, well, now I'm whatever, I'm this kind of good thing. And maybe you are, but then you still need to look in more deeply. And that's the viveka.
You know, it occurs to me for the first time in all of these conversations that one of the things, and I'm reducing, I really am, but one of the things that the feminization of yoga has done is to give us collectively an embodied experience of the truth of these words. Like, you know, discrimination in your own embodied experience when it happens. You might not be able to talk about it later really profoundly, prolifically, or any other way, because it's difficult to put the recognition of that thing as it is occurring in the moment into words, but you still know it. and you know that truth. And so hearing you describe it from the very beginning, the Prakriti Purusha, paradigm, and that sort of layering in, the sort of umbrella-ing of Tantra, which, Doug Keller has come on to talk to me twice about, essentially, which is just fascinating because he talks a lot about how the tantric angle, the tantric addition, I'm not sure what the word is there, of or in modern yoga practice really helps that hermetic, inward looking, remove yourself from the world because Prakriti is messy, because nature is always creeping in. You've got to turn in and find your own perfect self, your own Purusha inside, and sort of making, dual and sort of paradigmatic, one being good and one being bad, one go to, one move away from, one control, the other one set free, there's seems to me. And so at the same time, your experience of discernment or santosha, like inside yourself, for example, is maybe it's going to be the same as what I experienced. Maybe it isn't, but it inside yourself and I know it inside myself. And maybe that's where we're intersecting. Maybe that's where lineage blooms now. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I like that. I like that idea. I like the inquiry going out in directions, and then you keep that inquiry up, and this one direction becomes very clear for a while, another direction very clear, and what happens is we start to experience the space of consciousness through which all of these thoughts and feelings are coming.
Right.
And then in that case, one is getting much more, in my mind, into what we have referred to as the feminization of yoga, the inclusion of the strands, whether they're painful or they're joyful. They're going to be both. We know that. It's always changing. That ocean doesn't stop moving. The currents, and that's what we live in. And we live in this big ocean. And we also live in this, I live in this Pati ocean and you live in the Kim. And
yeah.
And right. so it is. Can you hold it? Is it enough? How I think it's a brave act to say, okay, yeah, I can deal with it. Bring it on.
Yeah.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. It's more bravery than I often feel that I have, but I understand exactly what you're saying. You try, but I think bravery might change and courage might change over time. I was in Germany so many years ago in my late teens, and my host mom, I was learning German in Berlin, and she was like, she said, speaking in German, you have so much Mut, which is German for courage. And I was like, what's that? I didn't know the word. And so I had to learn the word in German and move it back into English, courage. And all my life I've thought, I have so much courage because I was told that early, and maybe I do. And maybe that's my narrative. But then there's times, like, for example, now where I don't know if I have any or much, it changes. It just, you have to define it differently, I guess.
Yeah. And it's going to change again.
Right.
And the more you allow that space on the two ends, the more courage you're going to have.
Right.
Because there's courage in accepting, I don't know what to do. I didn't do this right. Oh dear, what now?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Pati, in the interest of time, because this is just, I could go on and on. It's so interesting to talk to you, and we'll have your links, in the show notes so people will come find you. Is there anything last you want to share, live that people can't otherwise find in the show notes or might want to hear from you about what you're going to do in these next, who knows how much time?
Oh, I'm planning to just continue to, to inquire, to go deeper, to play with it, to offer and receive, be alive, practice my dharma, which is this, and also to enjoy and discover the real gifts of being older. The gifts, there is something to this expanding of awareness that I am very glad to know is here. And I want to encourage others, especially women, to know that it is okay. In fact, it's good. In fact, it's really good.
Yeah.
As long as we don't have too much aversion, some aspect of it.
Right.
Right. So I think that's part of what I'd like to do over the next few years.
That's amazing. I am so glad to have met your acquaintance and had this conversation, and to add your thoughts and your whole lived experience to this conversation of, practicing well, which was the name of this podcast initially. And as Beryl Bender and I discussed several weeks ago, maybe practice is the lineage. Maybe that's just practice. Maybe that's the lineage. I don't know. But I just want to thank you so much for being here and for adding your whole lived experience to the mix.
I am very grateful that you asked me. I love to be able to share this. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.